The palace was quieter at night, its long marble corridors hushed except for the faint hum of distant security cameras. Elena Carter preferred it that way. She had learned early in her career that some pieces of art yielded their secrets only in silence. Tonight, the room smelled faintly of aged oil and varnish, the air cool against her skin as she leaned close to the portrait of a woman whose painted eyes had been staring at her for hours. Her brush moved slowly, coaxing back the colors time had stolen. She didn't belong here, at least not in the gilded sense. The presidential palace was a world of precision, politics, and power, a place where men in tailored suits walked with the air of people who believed they shaped history. She was just a restorer, summoned because the piece was too valuable to leave to anyone else. A commission like this could take months, and she didn't mind the late nights, fewer interruptions, fewer eyes. Her hand trembled slightly as she adjusted the magnifying glass over the delicate paintwork. The restoration was at its most fragile stage. One wrong stroke could undo months of preparation. She didn't hear the door open. She only felt it, an almost imperceptible shift in the room, a tightening of the air. The brush paused mid-stroke, and she straightened, turning slowly. He stood in the doorway, tall and utterly still, framed by the glow of the corridor behind him. President Adrian Voss was not the kind of man anyone expected to see unannounced. His presence was usually announced by aides, by press flashes, by an entire machine built to protect him from proximity. Tonight, there were no guards in sight, no staff trailing him, just the man himself in a dark suit that made the gold leaf of the room seem warmer in contrast. Elena's first instinct was to step back, but she caught herself. His gaze was steady, assessing, but not in the way Pia hopefully looked when they wanted to take something from you. This was different, like he was trying to read a language he hadn't spoken in years. She cleared her throat. "Mr. President," she said, her voice too loud in the quiet. His eyes moved to her hands, still hovering over the portrait. "Your hands are shaking," he said softly, his tone carrying none of the clipped authority she had heard on television. He stepped forward, slow enough that the polished floor barely registered his footfalls. "It's delicate work. You'll have to be gentle." He stopped just behind her shoulder, his presence a quiet weight. "I'll be gentle and go slow," he added, as if offering the words not for the painting's sake, but hers. Something in the way he said it sent an inexplicable shiver up her spine. She told herself it was only the suddenness of the moment, the disruption of her solitude, but she didn't quite believe it. She set the brush down carefully, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "The piece is centuries old," she said evenly. "It doesn't respond well to pressure." Neither, she thought, do people. For a heartbeat, they stood in silence, the world outside the room fading to nothing. His eyes lingered a moment longer than necessary, as if trying to place her in some private memory. And then, just as quickly, his expression shifted back into something she recognized from the news. Controlled, unreadable. But the seed of something else had already been planted, and she felt it take root before she could stop it. The morning after their brief encounter, Elena told herself it had been nothing more than coincidence, the president passing through that wing of the palace on some unannounced errand. The palace was a maze of official duties and private corridors, and she happened to be in one of them at the wrong time. Still, the image of him standing in the doorway lingered with a weight she could not shake. She returned to her workroom determined to bury herself in pigment and brushwork, but the stillness felt different now. It was no longer just the hum of distant air vents and the ticking of the antique clock on the wall. It felt watched, not in the obvious way of security cameras, but as though some unseen presence moved in the spaces between. By midday, the whispers began. 2 aides passing in the hall lowered their voices when they saw her. A housekeeper she had spoken to the day before avoided her eyes. When she asked for a fresh pot of varnish from the supply room, the clerk hesitated before handing it over as if her name had suddenly acquired a weight she did not understand. She stayed late again that night, the restoration entering its final phase. Her hands moved with precision, each stroke, slow, measured a careful negotiation between time and decay. Outside, rain swept against the tall windows, casting faint shadows across the portrait. She did not hear the door this time either, but she knew before she turned that it was him. Adrian Voss stepped inside alone again. His expression was unreadable, but his gaze seemed sharper than the night before. Elena straightened, sensing an unspoken question in the way he studied her work. He moved closer, his footsteps soundless on the ornate carpet until he stood at her side. "You work like the world could end if you rushed," he said quietly. She kept her focus on the brush. Perhaps it could. She did not mean it as an answer about the painting, and something in his eye told her he understood that. He leaned slightly to observe the canvas at her angle. She caught the faintest trace of something unexpected in his scent, cedar and rain, and underneath it a fatigue that was not physical. "You heard about the protest yesterday," he said. It was phrased like a statement, not a question. She nodded. "They were loud, but they stayed behind the gates." He glanced toward the high windows, then back at her. "Some of them want more than noise." His words were low, deliberate. He did not explain further, but she felt a ripple of unease. Before she could reply, the overhead lights flickered, dimmed, then steadied again. In the silence that followed, Adrian's gaze held hers a fraction longer than necessary, as though measuring her reaction. Then he stepped back, his voice quieter still. "If you find yourself here after dark again, keep the doors locked." He turned and left without another word. The soft click of the door closing left her alone in the golden light of the workroom, but the air no longer felt still. It felt charged, as if something unseen had shifted around her, and the fragile boundaries of her quiet life inside the palace had just begun to break. The next evening, Elena stayed later than she intended, not because the work demanded it, but because she needed the silence to think. The president's warning echoed in her head. "Keep the doors locked." She told herself it was only a precaution, perhaps even habit for a man in his position. Yet, there had been something in his tone, something heavier than simple concern. By the time she cleaned her brushes, the palace had fallen into its deep night hush. The corridors outside her workroom were dim, lit only by wall sconces that painted long shadows across the marble. She was halfway to the service elevator when she heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from the direction she had just left. She turned, expecting to see a guard, but the hallway was empty. The sound faded, replaced by the low hum of distant generators. She exhaled and continued, but her pace quickened. When the elevator doors slid open, she stepped inside, pressing the button for the ground floor. Just before they closed, she caught sight of a dark figure at the far end of the hall, unmoving, watching. Her heart thudded, but she told herself it could be anyone, a staff member, a guard. Yet something in the stillness of that silhouette made her skin prickle. The elevator carried her down, and she left the palace without looking back. The next morning she returned to find the workroom locked. A security officer checked her badge twice before letting her in. The portrait was untouched, but there was a folded note on her work table. No signature, just 6 words. "Be careful who you speak to." Her hands tightened on the paper. The staff avoided her more than ever now. Conversations hushed when she passed. People she had exchanged friendly nods with looked through her as if she were invisible. In the afternoon she crossed paths with the president in a narrow corridor. He slowed his stride when he saw her, his eyes flicking briefly to the note she still carried. "You got it, then?" he said quietly. She searched his face for meaning. "You left this?" His jaw tightened. "No, but I know who might have." She waited for him to explain, but instead he stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You need to understand that this building is full of people who wear loyalty like a mask, and some of them would rather see me fall than see the truth come out." "What truth?" she asked. His gaze held hers for a long moment before he replied, "Not all enemies stand outside the gates." Before she could speak again, an aide appeared at the end of the hall, calling his name. He glanced once more at the note in her hand, then at her face, as if trying to memorize it. "Keep your eyes open," he said softly. Then he was gone, and Elena was left standing in the dim corridor with the growing sense that she had stepped into a story she did not know she was part of. Rain hammered against the palace windows that night, the kind of relentless downpour that blurred the world beyond the glass. Elena stayed in the workroom longer than she planned, her brush tracing fine lines on the portrait, while her mind replayed the president's words. Not all enemies stand outside the gates. The warning clung to her as stubbornly as the smell of varnish in the air. Near midnight, the storm deepened. Thunder rolled across the city, lights flickered, and the air in the room shifted with the faint vibration of distant footsteps. This time she heard them clearly, not the steady patrol of guards, but a slower, softer rhythm, as if someone was trying not to be heard. She set her brush down and moved toward the door. The hallway was dim and empty, the golden sconces casting shadows that seemed to stretch unnaturally long. She took a step forward, and the sound stopped. Her pulse quickened. A cold draft slipped past her shoulder, even though the windows were locked. Turning back, she froze. The portrait behind her was no longer in its exact position. It had been shifted slightly, the frame crooked by the smallest margin. Her tools lay undisturbed, but she could see a faint smear along the edge of the canvas, a touch from fingers that were not hers. The door at the far end of the corridor opened, and President Adrian Voss stepped inside alone again. His gaze swept the room quickly, then fixed on her expression. "What happened?" She told him about the footsteps, the draft, the shifted painting. His jaw hardened without a word. He crossed the room, straightening the frame himself, his hands lingering as if he was confirming something unseen. He turned to her, his voice lower than before. "This is not random. Someone wants you unsettled." He glanced toward the windows, then back at her. "This storm is cover for movement in and out of the grounds." His eyes searched hers for a moment longer before he spoke again. "You cannot be here alone tonight." Before she could protest, he took her arm, not roughly, but with a grip that left no space for argument. The echo of their footsteps down the long marble corridor seemed louder than the storm outside. He led her through a series of side halls and locked doors until they reached a narrow staircase that spiraled upward to a part of the palace she had never seen. They emerged into a small study lined with shelves and heavy drapes. The fire was already lit, casting the room in warm light. Adrian closed the door and turned the key. "I can keep you safe here, but you need to understand," he said slowly. "If they are willing to rattle you, they are willing to do worse." Elena met his gaze, feeling the weight of the moment. The storm rattled the windows and the fire crackled between them, but it was the intensity in his eyes that held her still. She did not yet know who was after him or why she was caught in it. But for the first time she realized the danger was not abstract. It was here inside these walls with them. The storm had passed by morning, leaving the city washed clean under a pale winter sun. But inside the palace, the air felt heavier than the night before. Elena woke in the small study where she had spent the night, the fire now reduced to embers and the scent of smoke lingering. Adrian had left before dawn, leaving a note written in his precise hand. "Do not return to the workroom until I say it is safe." She paced the room, restless. Every instinct told her to leave the palace altogether, yet something stronger kept her there, a pull toward answers and toward the man who seemed to be at the center of all of it. She remembered the crooked frame, the footsteps, the draft through a locked window. None of it made sense, and the lack of explanation gnawed at her. By midday, a knock sounded at the study door. Elena opened it to find a young guard with nervous eyes. He handed her a small envelope sealed with the presidential crest and whispered, "They told me to give this to you in private before hurrying away." She broke the seal. Inside was a single line written in Adrian's handwriting. "Meet me in the East Wing Gallery at 3. Come alone." At exactly 3, she slipped through the palace corridors, moving quickly to avoid the clusters of staff. The East Wing Gallery was a long, vaulted hall lined with centuries of portraits. The air was cooler here, and the only sound was the echo of her steps until another pair joined hers. Adrian appeared from behind a column, his expression guarded but his eyes sharp. He led her to the far end of the gallery, stopping before an unremarkable painting of a hunting scene. From his pocket he produced a small brass key and unlocked a panel hidden in the frame. A section of the wall swung inward, revealing a narrow passage dimly lit by a single bulb. They stepped inside, the air immediately cooler. Adrian closed the panel behind them, sealing out the world. "In this hidden corridor, his voice sounded different, less formal, more urgent. "This palace has more secrets than its history books admit. Some of them are harmless, some could ruin governments." He glanced at her. "You have been noticed by people who do not forgive curiosity." She wanted to ask why her, why now, but the words caught in her throat. He stopped in front of a metal door, unlocking it with another key. Inside was a small room lined with filing cabinets and a single table covered in folders. Some bore the marks of official state seals, others were plain and unmarked. Adrian rested his hand on one particular file, his gaze fixed on her. "This is why you are in danger. Elena, this is why someone shifted that painting last night to send a message." She looked down at the folder, but before she could read the label, a noise from the passage made them both turn. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, drawing closer. Adrian's jaw tightened. He closed the folder in one sharp motion and whispered, "Stay behind me," as the shadows in the corridor began to move. The footsteps in the passage grew louder, each one deliberate, each one echoing in the narrow space. Adrian's body shifted slightly, blocking her view of the door. His hand moved inside his jacket, and when he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "No matter what happens, do not speak." The light above them flickered, casting long shadows across the walls. Then the door to the hidden corridor creaked open. A man stepped inside, tall, lean, dressed in the dark uniform of palace security, but his eyes were cold and assessing. They swept over Adrian, then paused on Elena with a sharpness that made her spine tighten. "Mr. President," he said, his tone neutral, but his gaze carrying something heavier. "You are not scheduled to be in this wing." Adrian's expression did not change. "I go where I need to." The man's eyes flicked to the table where the folder lay inches from Elena's hand. She stepped back instinctively, her pulse thudding in her ears. The guard's smile was thin. "Someone will want to know what you are doing here." He did not wait for a reply. He simply turned and left his boots striking the floor in a slow, measured rhythm until the sound faded. Adrian locked the door again, but his jaw was rigid. "They know," he murmured. The file remained unopened, but the weight of its presence filled the room. He looked at her with a sudden intensity. "If they think you have seen this, they will come after you, not to question, but to erase." She swallowed the urge to ask who they were. Instead, she forced her voice steady. "Why am I even part of this?" Adrian stepped closer, his eyes holding hers. "Because you were in the wrong place at the wrong time, and because I cannot let them decide what happens to you." He moved quickly, gathering the file and slipping it inside his jacket. Then he took her hand, his grip firm, but not harsh. "We are leaving this room, and you will not come back here until I say so." They retraced their steps through the narrow passage, emerging into the quiet of the gallery. The portraits stared down at them like silent witnesses. Halfway down the hall, Adrian stopped suddenly, pressing her into the shadow of a marble column. Two men in suits passed, speaking in low voices. She caught only fragments. National security compromised foreign contact inside the palace. Adrian waited until they were gone, then pulled her along. By the time they reached the study, her heart was pounding. He closed the door, turned the lock, and finally let go of her hand. "Tomorrow, you will come with me, somewhere outside these walls, somewhere they cannot follow." She wanted to believe him, but the unease in his eyes told her that wherever they were going, the danger would not be left behind. The next morning the palace looked calm from the outside, but Elena could feel the strain running beneath its polished surface. Guards moved in tighter formations, aides whispered in corners, and more than once she caught someone glancing at her before quickly looking away. Adrian appeared at her door without warning, dressed in a dark coat, his expression unreadable. "Bring only what you need for a day," he said. "We leave now." She obeyed, though every step toward the waiting car felt heavier than the last. They drove in silence past the high gates of the palace and into the winding streets of the capital. The further they went, the fewer government buildings they passed until the scenery gave way to older districts where narrow alleys hid cafes and markets from the main road. Adrian guided her into one of those alleys and through the back entrance of a small bookshop. The scent of old paper and cedar hung in the air. The shop was empty except for an elderly man who greeted Adrian with a nod and locked the door behind them. Without a word, he led them to a staircase hidden behind a tall shelf. Downstairs, the light was dim, the walls lined with metal cabinets and maps pinned under glass. Adrian motioned for her to sit at a long table, then pulled the folder from his coat. He placed it in front of her and said, "This is what they do not want you to see." She hesitated before opening it. Inside were photographs, documents, and coded messages. She recognized the faces of several high-ranking officials, some from foreign governments, others from Adrian's own cabinet. The pages detailed secret meetings, financial exchanges, and plans that hinted at something far larger than a simple political scandal. Elena looked up sharply. "This is treason." Adrian's gaze was steady, "And now you understand why you are a threat to them. You were seen with me the night the first breach happened. They believe you know more than you do, and they will not risk finding out how much you have learned." Before she could reply, the old man upstairs pounded once on the floor. Adrian's jaw tightened. He gathered the papers quickly and slid them into a hidden compartment in the table. He leaned close, his voice low. "Someone is here, and it is not by accident." Footsteps descended the stairs, slow, deliberate. Two figures emerged, both in plain clothes but with the posture of men trained to move without wasting energy. Their eyes locked on Adrian, one of them speaking in a voice that carried the weight of warning. "You have something that does not belong to you." Elena felt Adrian's hand brush hers under the table, a silent command to stay calm. The old man stood at the far wall, his eyes flicking between them as the room filled with a tension so sharp it felt like the air itself might break. The taller of the two men stepped forward and said, "If you hand it over now, this ends quietly." Adrian's voice was calm but unyielding. "If I hand it over now, it ends for all of us." The words hung in the stale air as Elena realized there would be no quiet ending to whatever had begun. The two men did not move right away, their eyes locked on Adrian with the cold patience of predators waiting for the right moment. The old man near the wall shifted slightly, his hand brushing against the edge of a cabinet as if feeling for something hidden. Adrian stood without rushing his height, casting a shadow across the table between them. "You came a long way for nothing," Adrian said, his voice even. The taller man's mouth curved into a faint smile. "We came for exactly what you think you can hide." Elena could feel the tension building like static in the air. She glanced toward the staircase, but the shorter man stepped casually into her line of sight, blocking the way. Adrian's hand brushed the underside of the table, and Elena heard the faint click of a mechanism. The hidden compartment slid shut, locking the folder inside. The taller man noticed. His smile faded. "You think that lock will stop us?" Adrian stepped closer, his tone still measured. "That lock is the least of your problems." Before the man could reply, the old shopkeeper spoke, his voice rough. "Leave now while you can. You know who this is, and you know what will happen if you try to take what he protects." The taller man's jaw flexed, but he gave a short nod to his partner. They turned and walked up the stairs without looking back. The creak of the door above was followed by silence. Elena exhaled, only then realizing she had been holding her breath. Adrian turned to the old man. "You bought us time, but not much." The shopkeeper gave a slow nod. "They will be back, and next time, they will not come with warnings." They left through a rear exit into an alley, washed clean by last night's rain. Adrian led her to an unmarked car parked beneath a leaning street lamp. As they drove, he kept glancing in the mirrors, scanning every passing vehicle. "Every person who saw us today will report it," he said quietly. "The network inside the palace is wider than you think." They crossed into the industrial quarter where the streets were nearly empty. Adrian stopped in front of a warehouse that looked abandoned. Inside it was dim but warm, lit by a few lamps and the glow of monitors along one wall. A man in a weathered jacket turned from the screens and nodded at Adrian. "She is the one then," Adrian confirmed. "She is the one." Elena felt the weight of their attention. The man at the monitors spoke, without looking away from the shifting images on his screens. "Once you see what is on these files, there is no going back." She hesitated, glancing at Adrian. His expression told her that whatever choice she made now would decide far more than her own fate. The man clicked on a video feed, and the grainy image of a private meeting room filled the screen. Around the table sat men she recognized from the photographs in the folder. Their voices were muffled, but the intent in their posture was unmistakable. They were planning something, and Adrian's name was on the board behind them in red marker. Elena's stomach tightened as the sound sharpened, revealing the words, "Remove him before the quarter ends." She turned to Adrian and saw no fear in his face, only resolve. She understood then that the danger was not creeping toward them from the edges. It was already here, and it was counting down. The warehouse felt colder after those words, "Remove him before the quarter ends," echoed through the speakers. Elena's eyes stayed on the grainy image of the meeting room, but her mind was racing. The men in that video were not fringe players. They were the highest levels of power, the ones who moved governments without elections. Adrian stepped closer to the screen, studying every face as if committing them to memory. His voice was quiet but edged with steel. They have already decided I am no longer useful. That means their next step will not be subtle. The man at the monitors leaned back in his chair. You have two choices, disappear or fight. Elena expected Adrian to hesitate, but his answer came without pause. I do not disappear. She felt his eyes on her then. You have to decide too, because once they realize how close you are to me, you will be more than a loose end. Before she could answer, the lights in the warehouse flickered twice, then went out. The hum of the monitors died, leaving only the sound of rain beginning to fall outside. The man in the jacket cursed under his breath. Backup generators should have kicked in. A metallic clank came from the far side of the building, the sound of a lock giving way. Footsteps followed, heavy, deliberate. Adrian moved instantly, pulling Elena toward a stack of crates. Stay low, he whispered. His body shielded hers as the shadows near the entrance shifted. Two figures stepped inside, flashlights cutting through the dark. One beam swept over the crates, stopping just short of their hiding place. A voice called out, We know you are here, Voss. Hand over the files and maybe we talk about terms. Adrian's reply was calm, but carried through the dark. If I give you what you want, you will kill her first. That bought them a few seconds of silence. Then the beam moved again, closer now. Elena's pulse roared in her ears. The man at the monitors pulled something from under his desk and slid it toward Adrian. A narrow metal case, locked with a code. Adrian's hand closed over it. He glanced at Elena, his voice low and certain. If they take me, you run, and you keep running. She wanted to protest, but the look in his eyes was not one she could argue with. The beam of the flashlight hit them then, and the voice shouted, Move! Adrian stood, his hands empty, the case now hidden under the crates. Elena stayed crouched, her heart pounding as the men advanced. The next moments blurred into motion. A sharp crash, the thud of bodies, the shout of the old man from the shop above, and then Adrian pulling her through a side door into the rain. They ran without looking back, their breath visible in the cold night air. Behind them, shouts echoed in the dark, but the city swallowed them quickly. When they finally slowed in the shadow of an overpass, Adrian pressed the metal case into her hands. It is all in here, every name, every plan. If I do not make it, you find someone who can use it. Elena's fingers tightened around the cold metal. She understood now that the truth was not just dangerous, it was lethal, and it was sitting in her hands. The rain had not stopped by morning. It fell in steady silver lines, turning the streets into mirrors. Elena sat in a cramped motel room, its single window fogged from her breath. The metal case rested on the bed between her and Adrian, untouched since the night before. Every time she looked at it, she felt the weight of what was inside, not just in metal and paper, but in lives, in the power it could destroy or protect. Adrian stood by the window, scanning the street below. His coat was damp, his hair still wet from the rain. He had not slept. She could see it in the tightness around his eyes. When he finally turned to her, his voice was low. We cannot stay here. They will sweep this area before noon. She wanted to ask where they could possibly go, but the knock at the door cut her off. 3 short raps, then silence. Adrian moved to the side of the door, his hand resting inside his coat. Elena's pulse quickened. Another knock, slower this time. From the other side, a voice whispered, Voss, it is me, the old shopkeeper. Adrian opened the door just enough to let him in. The old man's face was pale, his clothes damp from the rain. They have doubled their presence at the palace. They know you have the case, and they will not wait long to move. Adrian glanced at Elena. We leave now. The old man shook his head. Not both of you together. They are tracking movement in pairs. If you split, they cannot cover every route at once. The plan formed in seconds. Elena would take the case south to an address. The old man whispered into her ear while Adrian would head east, drawing pursuit away. She wanted to argue, but Adrian's eyes silenced her. He pressed his palm to her cheek for a brief moment. Stay alive. That is the only order I will ever give you. Minutes later, they slipped out through the back of the motel into the wet streets. She walked fast, head down, the case clutched in her bag. Every car that passed felt like it slowed Eve. Rye shadow felt like it followed. By the time she reached the edge of the district, her shoes were soaked and her breath came in shallow bursts. Then she saw them. Two men standing at the corner, eyes scanning the crowd. She turned into a side street without thinking, but one of them spotted her. Footsteps quickened behind her. She ran her bag, bouncing against her side. The streets blurred until a door opened ahead, and a hand pulled her inside. The old shopkeeper's contact, a woman with sharp eyes and a pistol at her hip, locked the door behind them. "Safe for now," she said. But when Elena handed her the case, she did not open it. She just looked at Elena and asked, "Do you know what you are carrying?" Elena nodded. "Truth." The woman's mouth tightened. Truth, and a death sentence for whoever delivers it. Somewhere across the city, Adrian was moving through his own maze of alleys and side streets, drawing the hunters away. Elena did not know if she would see him again, but she knew that as long as the case was in her hands, the story was not over, and if she had to, she would finish what he started, even if it meant burning the world to do it.